After 3 deaths on a cruise ship, fears over hantavirus going viral online. A top Texas epidemiologist on what science says today on The Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. The race for a U.S. Senate seat from Texas getting a lot of attention as the current Attorney General tries to take the seat of a fellow Republican. But what about the seat of the Attorney General? How much do you know about who's in the running? We'll get you up to speed. Wind power, one of the biggest stories of Texas energy in recent years, but now wind set to take second place to something else. We'll hear the what and why. Plus, the week in politics with the Texas Tribune and a whole lot more. Saddle up, because it's almost time. You know the one. Texas Standard Time. No matter where you are, there are times when people's interest seems to cluster around certain stories. You know what I mean? It's Texas Standard Time on this 8th day of May 2026. I'm David Brown. I've been doing this news thing so long I can remember wondering how we're supposed to know what subjects people were interested in. These days, anyone can find out with a quick search of Google Trends, and for the past 24 hours, one Google search term has been outperforming most everything else. That term is hantavirus, as in hantavirus cruise ship. Hantavirus update. What is hantavirus? How many people have hantavirus? You get the idea. Let's begin with the basics. Concern about hantavirus is rising because of a rare deadly outbreak on a cruise ship this week, one that has raised concerns about a specific strain apparently capable of passing from person to person, resulting in at least 3 deaths on board. While hantavirus is usually a rare rodent-borne infection, this unusual confined and high fatality scenario has a lot of people scared. According to the AP, health authorities across 4 continents are trying to track down and monitor passengers who disembarked before this outbreak was detected and trying to trace others who may have come into contact with them since then. None of the remaining passengers or crew on the ship are currently symptomatic. The ship's currently in the Atlantic, moving north from Cape Verde toward Tenerife. World Health Organization says the risk to the wider public is low. But the fear, that's another thing. In the New York Times this morning, a headline in the opinion section seemed to sum that up. Here's how freaked out you should be about the hantavirus cruise ship. It was followed by a decision tree. All right, well, let's pause for just a moment. We're going to try to take on some questions from a scientific perspective with an accent on Texas. And for more, we're joined by Dr. Catherine Troisi, a professor of epidemiology at UT Health Houston School of Public Health. Dr. Troisi, welcome.
Thank you.
What are the symptoms around hantavirus and how's it spread?
So hantavirus is spread from rodents through their urine, feces, saliva, or if you get bitten by a rat also can spread the disease. But again, it's important to emphasize we just don't see that many cases. The symptoms are, it starts out like flu. So fever, body aches, that kind of thing, but it can quickly change into something more serious, infecting the lungs. And the case fatality rate, that is the number of people who are infected who end up unfortunately dying, can be high. But it's important to emphasize that we don't always know the denominator of that number, how many people were infected, because if they don't have symptoms, they don't get tested. So we see it in the United States, particularly in drier states, Southwest states, Arizona, Colorado. We have seen cases in Texas, but not very many over the years. We've only been keeping track of cases since 1993.
And just to be clear, those cases in Texas unrelated to this cruise ship, right?
Exactly. I'm talking about over the past 30 years.
Yes, over history. Now, there were apparently a few Texans on this cruise ship where this outbreak occurred. Are those people being tracked to your knowledge? And is it, I think a question that a lot of people have is how are public health officials making sure that the outbreak is contained and being monitored?
Yes. There are 2 Texans who were on that ship who have returned to Texas. They are being monitored by the Department of State Health Services. And right now, they don't have any symptoms. And to be honest, it's probably unlikely they will. Hantavirus is not easy to transmit. This is not COVID. You need close, intimate, which means sharing a room. In fact, of the 3 people who have died, 2 were husband and wife. Obviously they were in very close contact. So they are being monitored for symptoms, but, I would guess nothing's going to happen. And even if one of them or both of them do show signs of infection, again, hantavirus is not easy to transmit.
You answered, I think, a question that I had about why people are so concerned when you mentioned COVID. Compared to COVID-19, the communicability, there's really no similarity from what I understand you to be saying here. Am I right?
That is true. And I think part of the fear is that COVID, we saw those first, a lot, not the very first, but a lot of the first cases on cruise ships. So I think that similarity is freaking people out. But one of the hallmarks of COVID that made it so transmissible was that people who were infected but didn't have any symptoms yet could get another person infected. That is not true with hantavirus. You have to be showing symptoms. And by the time you're showing symptoms, you are not going to the grocery store or to work or, around other people. So that's one big difference between how COVID is spread and how hantavirus is spread.
Another question folks have, is there anything that they should be doing to keep themselves healthy? Or, is it too early to even consider anything like that?
Well, there's always things you should be doing to keep yourself healthy, but to prevent getting infected with hantavirus, nothing that you should be doing because of these cases. However, if you have a cabin that is closed for the winter and you go back into it in the spring, rodents have gotten in there, they've made deposits, and then you're cleaning out the cabin, for example, you can be exposed to hantavirus that way. So it's important to make sure that rodents don't get into your dwelling. I mean, that's a good idea anyways. If you are cleaning an area that's been deserted for a while and may have rodent droppings, use an N95 mask. And hand hygiene, always important.
We've been speaking with Dr. Catherine Troisi, a professor of epidemiology at UT Health Houston School of Public Health. And we're going to have a link to more details, including the facts, at texasstandard.org. Dr. Troisi, thanks so much for joining us and providing us with some information and background here.
Thank you for having me.
Attention Texas voters, here we go again. Early voting for the Texas primary runoff elections begins in just under 2 weeks. One of the most important decisions Republican and Democratic voters will be making will be to pick nominees for Texas Attorney General. Andrew Schneider of Houston Public Media takes a look at the candidates who are trying to succeed outgoing Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's now running for the GOP Senate nomination.
In late March, Republican candidates and voters converged on the city of Grapevine for the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC. One of the featured speakers was Galveston State Senator Mays Middleton. He highlighted his legislative achievements, passing laws mandating the display of the Ten Commandments in public schools, banning transgender individuals from women's restrooms, and barring Chinese nationals from buying land in Texas.
I've been writing these laws, drafting these laws, defending them on the House floor against attacks by Democrat attorneys, defending them on the Senate floor against attacks by Democrat attorneys. Who better to enforce these as Attorney General than someone that was on the ground floor writing these and already defeating the left to get them over the finish line?
Middleton was the first-place finisher in the March Republican primary for Attorney General, but he fell well short of what he needed to avoid a runoff. That came despite his spending over $13 million, much of it from his personal fortune as an oil and gas magnate. Central Texas Congressman Chip Roy came in second. Speaking recently with CBS Texas, Roy pointed to his greater experience as a prosecutor, including as first assistant attorney general under Ken Paxton.
My opponent is trying to buy the brand MAGA. Some of us have been out there earning that brand and earning the stripes as someone who's been in court. And I think if you want someone that you can count on, then you need to look at what they've done. You know, I've been in the trenches. I'm currently the lead author of the Save America Act, the number one priority for the president.
Middleton and Roy are each trying to convince voters that they are the true conservative and that their opponent is a rhino, Republican in name only. It's a well-worn path to an office that has been in Republican hands for decades. The two Democrats vying to become Attorney General both argue that successive Republicans have politicized the office to the detriment of ordinary Texans. Former Galveston Mayor Joe Jaworski is making his second bid for Attorney General after losing the nomination 4 years ago. Jaworski says if he's elected, he'll use the office to make life more affordable and expand voter access.
Let me just contrast it with how it's been used for the last decade plus under Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton especially. It is an office of persecution. It is used as the Spanish Inquisition used the church to punish and stoke fear.
Jaworski placed a distant second in the March Democratic primary behind Dallas State Senator Nathan Johnson. Jaworski argues Johnson has made too many compromises with Republicans as a lawmaker. Johnson, however, points to a superior record of winning elections, including flipping a district that had been in Republican hands for 30 years.
During my time in office, I've been able to both be a loud, proud, strong, persuasive voice for Democratic values, and also, from the position of the Democratic minority, pass important legislation by working when necessary against Republicans, also forming coalitions with Republicans and Democrats.
Johnson says if elected, his priorities would be enforcing anti-monopoly and consumer protection laws and fighting corruption. But to do that, he would need to break a Democratic losing streak that dates back to 1998, when now Senator John Cornyn was elected as the state's top law enforcement official. I'm Andrew Schneider in Houston.
Y'all know what remittances are, right? Transfers of money sent by foreign-born workers back to their families or others in their home countries. With an estimated 1.5 million people in Texas using apps to send remittances, a consumer watchdog says U.S. border officials may be keeping tabs. That story and a whole lot more as the Standard continues. Texas Standard time check coming up on 19 minutes past the hour. Stay with us.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Realtors, providing representation at every stage of the home ownership journey, helping clients understand their options and manage complex transaction details. Info at texasrealestate.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Monthly Presents The Story, a docuseries about the state of Texas. Stories about our culture and what's at stake from the perspective of the magazine's writers. Airing weekends on local PBS stations and streaming on the PBS website and app.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Texas has a well-known shortage of water, and now comes a fresh forecast on the impact of data centers sprouting up across the Lone Star State. KEDT's Rob Boskamp has more.
A recent report from the University of Texas at Austin revealed that data centers could potentially account for 3 to 9% of the state's water use by then. Data centers currently represent less than 1% of the state's water use. Estimates used in the study include water used for cooling as well as to produce power needed for data centers. Manufacturing accounts for about 7% of Texas's water use, according to the current state water plan. Much of the state's power production comes from natural gas, coal, or nuclear energy, which themselves guzzle about 5% of the state's water use for cooling. Researchers said that over 400 data centers are operating or under construction in Texas, and that more are planned. I'm Rob Boskamp in Corpus Christi.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Consumer Reports just released a new investigation into the fast-growing world of remittance services. These are the companies and apps millions of folks use to send money to family abroad, often Mexico. The group examined 5 major platforms and found hidden costs, confusing pricing, and concerns about how users' financial data might be shared with law enforcement. The report lands as immigration enforcement ramps up and ahead of Mother's Day, one of the busiest times of the year for international money transfers. Delicia Hand is a senior director at Consumer Reports. Before that, she was at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Delicia, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first off, let's talk about what a remittance app actually is and how important these services have become for immigrant families and folks sending money abroad.
It's a lifeline, not a transaction. So immigrants are often sending money home to their families, and that can be a substantial backbone. And then the app itself is really just the way to send the money, right? So in the same way that you might use a Venmo or other peer-to-peer app to split the cost of dinner or send money to a friend or pay for something here in the U.S., you can use certain apps to send money abroad.
Well, now let me ask you something. Why wouldn't someone just use Venmo? Why not just use Venmo?
So the primary difference is that you're sending money abroad, overseas. And so that is not necessarily a simple transaction. And you can't use apps like Venmo to send across to Mexico or rural Africa. So remittance apps support over 200 countries at times, also cash pickup at physical locations. And they work in places, frankly, that there's not a huge banking infrastructure. And so peer-to-peer apps are just not built for that service. It's a very different service, which is just focused on sending money abroad.
Now, pardon my lack of understanding, but do these apps actually do the monetary conversion, like, for instance, from U.S. dollars to, say, Mexican pesos, for example?
At the end of the day, from a consumer perspective, yes, they do. And that's often one of the things that we've found where some of the money disappears. So the companies don't just move dollars, they convert them into local currency, whether that's pesos, naira, rupees, or whatever the country currency is. And they do so at the exchange rate that they choose to offer.
I see. So they're taking a little for themselves. That's part of their business.
Yeah, the real market rate is publicly available, but these apps often apply their own, sometimes higher or worse for the consumer rate, and they'll pocket the difference. So when Western Union charges you a $1.99 fee and Wise maybe charges $2.47, you might actually think that Western Union is cheaper, but the exchange rate the recipient in Mexico gets less money despite the fee because they also have to factor in the exchange rate that the company charges.
So in practice, someone may be trying to shop around to get the best rate, but they're not aware of, say, these markups in the exchange rate, a way that some of these apps can kind of nickel and dime users without them realizing it.
Yeah, that's true. And that's one of the things that our evaluation found, which is there's not a lot of transparency here. In fact, in practice, it's nearly impossible. The real exchange rate, which is called the mid-market rate, is what banks use when they trade with each other. It's on Google. Anyone can Google it right now. But most consumers have no idea that it exists, and let alone, that they should be comparing their app's rate against it. You'd have to look it up and then open up 5 different apps, enter the exact same transaction in each, do the math every single time. So it's a complicated process.
Yikes. Now, when you sign up for one of these apps, you have to provide, I would imagine, the app service a good deal of personal data. What happens with all of that information about who's using these apps?
That was one of our findings, which is that the apps collect way more personal data than maybe is necessary. You do give a lot of information, which is required. So name, address, phone number, government ID, sometimes biometrics, your exact location, and the record of who you send money to and how often. That's a lot of information. It also, there's what the app collects, but what they do with it. So oftentimes we find that the apps are sharing the information broadly for marketing, business partners, and for other uses.
Well, now, I know that one of the rationales for collecting all that data is that the government's trying to thwart financial crime. Are they being used by the government in other ways?
If there's somebody who with legal authority that asks, they'll hand it over. And there are other use cases, potentially for law enforcement, for example, which are important and can be fighting things like money laundering. There's also documented evidence that it's been used for immigration enforcement, regardless of whether there's actual cause or not. So, there's a concern about the broad applicability.
Well, wait a minute. Is that revealed to the users? Do they know that this information could be shared for immigration enforcement?
So our findings across the board show that companies could do better here, which is they don't always share in plain and clear language how the information could be used. So technically, the information is in the privacy policy, but practically from a consumer perspective, not really. These policies are long, they're dense, they're legal documents written by lawyers for lawyers, and most are only available in English, even though the majority of these apps users don't speak English as their first language.
Delicia Hand is Senior Director at Consumer Reports. We're going to link to her reporting at texasstandard.org so you can check it out in depth. Delicia, thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for covering this.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com. Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider that's been caring for hardworking Texans for over 30 years. More at texasmutual.com/expert partner.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Harab. Service has largely been restored to the online education platform Canvas. A cyber attack shut down access to schools and colleges across the country. It's unclear how much personal information was compromised, though. Meanwhile, Attorney General Ken Paxton announced a statewide investigation into nearly 30 school districts. Our Bianca Seward reports Paxton wants to see if schools are displaying the Ten Commandments posters in classrooms.
At the heart of the investigation are two laws passed last year, Senate Bill 10, which requires classrooms to hang posters of the Ten Commandments, and Senate Bill 11, which required school boards to vote to adopt or reject a policy creating a prayer period. The ACLU filed suits arguing Senate Bill 10 violates the First Amendment. Several school districts now under investigation were named in the lawsuits and until recently barred from displaying Ten Commandments posters under a court injunction. But in late April, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the injunction, immediately requiring the districts to comply with the law. Houston ISD, Austin ISD, and Dallas ISD are some of the 29 districts named in the Attorney General's press release. I'm Bianca Seward in Houston.
2 Texas residents were on a cruise ship that experienced an outbreak of Hantavirus. Our Abigail Ruman reports state health officials said the passengers had left the ship and returned to the U.S. before the outbreak was identified.
Hantavirus is a rare infection that can rapidly progress and become deadly. It typically spreads through contact with bodily fluids from wild rodents. However, the Texas Department of State Health Services, or DSHS, says the strain involved in the outbreak on the cruise ship can spread from person to person in limited circumstances, like close prolonged contact with someone who is sick. The state says the 2 individuals reported they are not experiencing symptoms and didn't encounter anyone sick aboard the ship. DSHS says it will not release additional personal details about the passengers due to privacy concerns. I'm Abigail Ruman in Dallas.
Texans working in industries that require an occupational license now have to show proof of legal status in the U.S. The new requirement by the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation went into effect on May 1st. Juan Carlos Cerda is the state director of the American Business Immigration Coalition. He says the new rule will further push a vulnerable group into the shadows.
They will have to continue trying to get an income because bills don't pay themselves. but at the same time, they are at risk of being liable for practicing without a license.
And there's a deal in place that should allow summer camps to reopen. The Texas Department of State Health Services says youth camps that cannot meet a fiber optic internet requirement can still get a license by meeting other safety standards. 19 camps filed a suit. The law was passed in response to the deadly 4th of July flooding in the Hill Country. I'm Matt Harrop in the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. For a decade, wind power was the story of Texas energy. That's overstatement, but you get the point. Everyone's been talking about how wind energy has been growing by leaps and bounds in the Texas energy mix. Well, now for the first time since 2016, natural gas has leapfrogged wind in ERCOT's connection queue. That's the waiting list for power projects that want to plug into the electric grid. Any guesses as to what's driving the change? Oh, come on, I'm sure you have some idea, no? Brandon Mulder is an energy journalism fellow at the Energy Institute at the University of Texas at Austin, and he wrote about this story for the Texas Tribune. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you, David.
You write that data centers now represent about 360,000 megawatts of potential demand. That's more than 4 times ERCOT's all-time peak load. That sounds like a lot, but it also sounds like a lot of gobbledygook to a lot of folks. What does 360,000 megawatts mean other than a lot?
Well, I guess to put it in context, ERCOT's peak demand that was set in 2023 is 85,000 megawatts. So that's quadruple what ERCOT has ever seen demanded on the grid.
So what does it mean that gas has overtaken wind in ERCOT's interconnection queue, and how seriously should we take that queue?
Well, so the queue itself is, as you mentioned, just a preliminary waiting list where project developers who want to build a power plant, be it a renewable project or a gas project, they enter this queue and wait for several years before they can connect. But not every project makes it to the finish line. Only about 22% of projects actually get completed and built. Mm-hmm. In 2016, when wind was getting a lot of momentum, that was the first year where the volume, the capacity of wind that was on the queue had overtaken gas. For years before, gas generation was the leading source of energy in ERCOT. But then fast forward to late last year, and ever since then, gas has overtaken wind. And that's, of course, as you mentioned, driven by data center demands. And data centers really like gas because it provides a firm power source, whereas wind and other renewable resources are intermittent.
Now, see, that you anticipated what I was going to ask, because I wasn't sure whether wind is slowing down now, whether there's less enthusiasm overall. Sounds like the industry just prefers natural gas because you get uninterrupted power.
Exactly. No, it is sort of two forces happening at the same time. For wind, there's lots of policy and economic headwinds. Wind and solar projects lost their federal tax credits under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year. Mm-hmm. At the same time, wind's slowdown is somewhat of a product of its own success, because after so many years of wind developers going out there and setting up turbines, a lot of the best areas of Texas have been overpicked. So there's not really a whole lot of other parcels of land that are really prime opportunities for wind development.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. So what do you see this as inevitably meaning then in a state where everyone's talking about new data centers, more natural gas power plants in Texas? And how do you see this playing out?
What's useful about looking at the interconnection queue, while all those projects won't make it to the finish line, it does kind of forecast what the grid's generation makeup will look like. And so, yes, I think what we can sort of surmise from this is that gas will become more popular as more data centers flood onto the grid, and demand of this firm, consistent power to run their AI algorithms.
What do you think all this means for everyday Texans? We talking about prices going up for electricity, concerns about reliability? What do you think?
I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into what our bills are. For instance, if there's more gas on the grid, then those gas plants are going to be kind of reliant on what gas prices are. And those gas prices have been in huge flux over this last year, especially since the onset of the Iran war. So it's hard to say how much exactly this could impact your everyday utility bill, but we can say that just data centers overall are definitely going to change the landscape of energy in Texas.
Watch this space. Brandon Mulder certainly is. He's an energy journalism fellow at the Energy Institute at the University of Texas, Austin. We're going to link to his piece in the Texas Trib at our website, texasstandard.org. Brandon, thanks again.
Thank you, David.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Casa. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org.
It's not just about the brisket or the ribs or the sausage or even the sides. It's the culture and people who are passionate about it. Where there's smoke, there's Daniel Vaughn, Texas Monthly Barbecue Editor. Join us next Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Where There's Smoke comes from HEB.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. During Jace Tunnel's beachcombing surveys along the Texas coast, he's grown accustomed to finding odd things washed ashore, from toothbrushes and action figures to weathered dolls. But one item in particular continues to stand out.
Along just 13 miles of beach, I documented 14 piggy banks scattered among the thick rack of sargassum. That makes over 60 piggy banks that I've found personally over the past year. Their bright colors, pink, blue, and yellow, contrasted sharply with the tangled seaweed, making them easy to spot but hard to explain. Over the past year, reports of these sea pigs have come from across the Gulf, suggesting this is not just an isolated event. What's new, however, is a clue about their origin. Most we recover, we believe, were manufactured in the Dominican Republic, pointing to the Caribbean as a likely source. So how did they get here? One possibility is a lost shipping container, as thousands fall overboard each year. Another is land-based disposal, where bulk plastic enters rivers and is carried to sea. Once in the Gulf, currents do the rest. The loop current and its eddies can move debris long distances before depositing it along the Texas beaches, often mixed in with seasonal sargassum. Continued monitoring will help determine whether this spike comes from a single event or an ongoing source. But for now, these colorful little travelers keep arriving with every tide each week. Maybe the Gulf is just saving up for something big, one pig at a time.
Wherever Texas meets the tide, you'll find this guy, Jace Tunnel, the Texas beachcomber. Jace is Director of Community Engagement at the Hart Research Institute at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi. The end of the school year is fast approaching. Last classes, last exams, last rides on the school bus. And for students at Austin ISD's Beta Check Middle School, this year carries another last, the final days before the campus closes for good. Beta Check is one of a growing number of schools across Texas shuttering their doors as districts grapple with falling enrollment and rising costs. But before the lights go out, one of the school's final chapters is playing out on the track with speed, pride, and a lot of heart. Austin Independent School District student reporter Greta Diaz-Gonzalez-Vasquez of our home station KUT News introduces us to the Beta Check Bobcats track and field team as they prepare for one last competition.
On a Tuesday afternoon, the Beta Check track and field team walks into the gym.
Line it up for the warm-ups.
Since they learned that the school is set to close, Coach Chris Gonzalez says students are pouring their hearts into making sure they win their last track and field meet. It's less than a week away.
We told them at the beginning of the school year, it's like, hey, we're going to go out. Let's try to go out on top. That would be the perfect ending to our story.
8th grader Isabella Hernandez says the track team is one of the best things of her time at Bedichek.
You're able to show what you've accomplished this whole year, especially at the zone meet. It's going to be a really big accomplishment if we make a place, and I think it would be good to be the last people to do track.
Hernandez and her teammates have constant reminders that Bobcats are excellent athletes. The ceiling of the gym is decorated with a couple dozen banners that showcase their victories over the years. In the hallway outside the gym, there's plaques and photos on the walls and inside trophy cases. If there's someone who remembers vividly a lot of those victories, it's Coach April Mendoza. In one of the trophy cases, there's a faded photo of a proud girl dressed in full football gear. How old were you?
That's 8th grade, 13.
Mendoza went to Bedichek in the 90s. She was one of the few female students that played football.
Now that I came back to work, it's something that I show. We've had a lot of girls that have come and gone in between to show them that it's possible. And come on, have fun. Why not?
She knows many of her students have deep roots at Bedichek. Their parents, maybe even their grandparents, were Bobcats. That's not her case. Coming from a military family that moved every couple of years, Bedichek was the first place she put down some roots.
We were always moving every 2 or 3 years, and this was home. This is where we were able to make home. And this is where the adults were here to support you in whatever.
She graduated, and after several more moves, she came back to Austin. In 2008, she became a full-time teacher at Bedichek, then a coach. Overall, she has spent 21 years of her life, almost half of it, inside this campus. Over the years, she learned to appreciate the love her teachers and coaches put into her education.
This is not a very affluent community. For example, our track meets are some of the best in AISD, and they know that as a middle school. But a lot of the things that we have is because the coaches were resourceful, and during construction, getting cones or finding flags that were no longer used.
Coaches take turns with the lawnmower and edge cutter to make sure the fields are kept up. They clean the gym, they repair things. Mendoza says teachers and coaches have worked hard to create a family environment at Bedichek. That's why when she learned that the school was closing, she broke down in tears.
It's like mourning a friend who just got told they have terminal cancer. You want to honor their life because that's what they deserve, and you want to be happy in their last times, but you know that there's going to be an end, and it's going to hurt.
Mendoza thought she would retire from Bedichek. Now, next year, she'll be at Mendez Middle School. A few days later, the Bedichek track and field team arrives at Nelson Field. It's their last chance to get a medal as Bobcats.
Let's leave it all out here.
Gonzalez leads the boys to the track. Mendoza oversees the girls competing in long jump. Hernandez is one of them.
Hopefully we do get first because it's our last track season, so I'm hoping for first.
Her first and second jumps weren't as good as she had expected. So after her third jump, she tells Coach Mendoza that she's scared.
I don't think you should be. No, because I'm going to go confirm and take a picture, but I don't think you should be scared. I'd be willing to bet that those y'all's last jumps were all about,
I think that was my PR.
4 inches further than the other ones. I'd be willing to bet.
Wow.
Now they have to wait for the results to come in. Coach Mendoza sits at the bleachers while girls cheer for the boys' team who are still competing on track. She keeps refreshing the athletics website on her phone to see if individual results have made it in. And when they do, she goes to Hernandez.
You went 13 even.
Oh!
13-3.
Wow!
14-2.
Really?
For first place.
Wait, really?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. Oh my gosh.
Coach Mendoza continues refreshing the website to figure out if they got a first place as a team.
Maybe I should look at the boys to take my mind off of it.
But finally, she gets the results for the girls' team.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That is 8th grade girls first with 185 points. The second place had 136. That's 7th grade girls first at 160 points. Second had 130.
Once the meet is over, coaches gather students at the center of the field.
Eighth grade girls.
Boys get second place. They both get plaques. But now that Bedichek is closing, coaches don't know where those winning plaques will go.
I think that they'll go up on the wall where they're supposed to go, and where they end up after that, only the coaches will know. Only the coaches will know.
Energy is running high as the coaches and students get a chance to celebrate together.
I got a call that says there's no better check next year. This right here is all we got. That's all we need. This is all we got. That's all we need. Bring it down. Good job.
This is the last time Belichick students and coaches stepped on a track as Bobcats. But as Mendoza and Gonzalez put it, once a Bobcat, always a Bobcat. I'm Greta Diaz Gonzalez Vázquez in Austin.
This is Sean Petrie with the Typewriter Rodeo, and we are a group of friends who type poems on the spot on whatever topics people want. Homework Begone, for a younger listener named Jasper who asked for a poem about not having any more homework. If I could invent a machine to go back in time, there's one thing I'd do to make everything fine. I would find the day that homework started, and I would make sure that day quickly departed. Because why do we need to do work at home? When I leave school, school should leave me alone. I spend all day doing writing and math. When I get home at night, let me choose my own path. So with my time machine, I'll go back to that first day, and instead of homework, I'll change it to home play. This is Sean Petrie, and you're on Texas Standard Time.
Well, you can hear the Typewriter Rodeo every Friday here on the Standard. Hey, got a suggestion for a custom poem? Send it on over. We'll turn it into a little art. For now, let's take up the week that was in Texas politics. Joining us to help us with that project, Jasper Scherer. He's politics editor for the Texas Tribune. Jasper, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Let's take a look at one of the headlines here in the Trib this week. Paxton investigating Texas schools to ensure posting of 10 commandments. Ken Paxton is the subject of this headline here. He's the Attorney General who's currently running for U.S. Senate. What's this story about?
Well, this is, it was a little unclear what prompted this, other than just the fact that a federal appeals court basically upheld this law, which requires Texas public schools to display the 10 Commandments in their classrooms. But what Paxton is doing is just saying he's looking in to make sure that a number of school districts, a lot of which happen to fall in some of the state's major metro areas, some of the biggest districts in the state, just to make sure they're complying with the law. So he didn't indicate necessarily that there's evidence they're disobeying it, but he just wants to confirm.
Is a lot of this about politics, do you think? I mean, this obviously he's running for office. I mean, it's not clear that anyone has raised a serious question about people resisting or pushing back against the state law.
Yeah, I think it's definitely fair to consider the timing. We're a couple weeks out from May 26th, which is when Paxton will be on the ballot trying to take the nomination away from John Cornyn. And he's been, firing off kind of a string of sort of politically charged lawsuits just throughout this primary. And I think it's definitely been a factor, just keeping his name in the headlines.
Want to shift to another story on Wednesday. A new president was confirmed over at Texas A&M, Susan Balabina. How well known is she to the Texas A&M community?
Well, I think the fact that she's really well known to them was kind of the point of this appointment. And what I mean by that is, this is appointing Susan Balabina to be president ends this period of kind of turmoil going back to the former president, Mark Welch's resignation. And that was over this saga where there was a secretly recorded classroom discussion on gender identity that kind of erupted into this political upheaval. So Welch resigns, everything's going crazy, and they kind of ended up going with the familiar face to right the ship. Balabina had been the executive vice chancellor for the whole A&M University system, and she was also Welsh's chief of staff at one point. So, I think they just wanted somebody to come in and kind of make peace with everything that's going on.
Kind of bring some stability, it sounds like. We're almost out of time for our segment, but I would encourage folks to go over to texastribune.org and check out these stories in depth and a whole lot more. It's been a busy week in Texas politics, and Jasper Scherer has been walking us through a couple of the top stories. He's politics editor for the Texas Trib. Jasper, thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Of course. Thanks for having me, David.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard.
As Texas courts wrangle over what to do with hemp-derived THC products, we asked Texans to share their own experiences and opinions with us. I'm Wells Dunbar with the Texas Standard, and what we heard was deeply personal. Stories about survival, fear, jobs, mental health, and confusion over cannabis laws in Texas right now.
The hemp industry has saved me in more than one way.
Amanda works in the hemp industry, but she also says THC products helped her cope with PTSD and the death of her partner.
And I didn't think I was going to be able to make it. But because of the hemp industry, I got a job and I am surviving.
Other folks described concerns about increasingly potent cannabis products and concentrates. And for some families, those concerns are deeply personal. Veronica sent us this tape describing her son's last 5 years in treatment.
He has been in 3 different rehabs, sober livings, and psychiatry wards. Right now, he suffers from psychosis, and we have spent thousands of dollars, more than $200,000 between rehabs, sober livings, and medication, doctors, hotels, flights, you name it. We need to stop this.
Researchers are still trying to understand how heavy use of high-potency THC affects younger users and people vulnerable to mental illness. Some listeners and advocates say Texas should go much further in restricting THC products.
My name is Aubrey Adams. I am from your future, from Colorado, and I have lived this nightmare not only in Colorado, but in Texas.
Aubrey is with a group called Citizens for a Safe and Healthy Texas, which supports banning THC products currently sold around the state.
Our families have paid the financial and emotional cost. We stand with the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, on a full ban of hemp-derived THC in the state of Texas, so Texas doesn't continue to fall and become like California and Colorado.
But others say the bigger issue is that Texas laws no longer reflect how cannabis is actually being used or regulated.
The problem is that our laws haven't kept up with the way that people use cannabis now.
Attorney Dustin Nims says as long as some cannabis products remain legal, Texas law needs to catch up with reality.
Ultimately, we need to change our laws so that people can use legal cannabis in a way that doesn't subject them to criminal arrest or prosecution for something that otherwise should be legal under the 2019 Farm Bill.
And as lawmakers, courts, and advocates continue debating where Texas goes next on cannabis policy, Texans themselves are still trying to navigate the consequences of the laws already on the books. I'm Wells Dunbar, and this is The Talk of Texas.
We're out of time for today's big broadcast, but you can keep up with the news 24/7 at texasstandard.org. The managing editor of The Standard is Gabriel Munoz. Our managing producer is Laura Rice. Our executive producer is Rhonda Fanning. We'll be back here on Monday. I'm David Brown, wishing you warm Mother's Day weekend wishes and all the very best from Austin.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Woldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family. Would your company or organization like to be a sponsor as well? Contact your local station for opportunities within your community. For statewide sponsorships, visit TexasPublicMediaNetwork.com.